Tonight we step into a world where dawn brings no mercy, a brutal, mud-soaked realm of the Middle Ages where being blind, lame, or mad could mean a death sentence by dusk. Picture waking in 1300, your body or mind broken, in a village where plague stalks the shadows and superstition brands you a sinner. Survival isn't just a fight. It's a miracle carved from hunger, scorn, and relentless cold. No hospitals, no rights, only a cruel road of isolation and pain. So settle in, hit that like if you're ready to uncover this forgotten struggle and share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's walk this grim path together. In this unforgiving reality, there are no hospitals to mend you, no wheelchairs to carry you, no safety nets to catch you. The streets are a treacherous mire of manure and waste. A blind person stumbles, falling into an open sewer with no one to help. A one-armed man begs for scraps, flinching from kicks and curses spat by passers-by. A woman, labeled as mad, is chained in a damp cellar, her cries swallowed by the dark. Disability wasn't just a personal struggle. It branded you as an outcast, a burden, or a sinner marked by divine wrath. The medieval mindset was steeped in faith and fear, viewing disability through a distorted lens. Many saw it as punishment for sins yours or your family's, while others thought suffering elevated you a living martyr, enduring a personal purgatory. But these beliefs rarely sparked kindness. Instead, they bred scorn and isolation. In a 1200s French village, a blind girl is hidden by her shamed family, treated as a secret disgrace. In 1350, England, a leper is banished, a bell tied around his neck to warn others of his cursed presence. By 1400, a man raving in a market square is bound to a post, mocked as a fool while crowds jeer. Now place yourself in their worn, tattered shoes. There's no medicine to ease your pain, no rights to shield you, no hope for a brighter dawn. Your only task is to endure a single day, 24 hours, in a world that seems determined to break you. Spoiler, the odds are not in your favor. This era's harshness wasn't uniform, though. Historians still debate whether medieval society was entirely cruel or hid pockets of compassion beneath its grim surface. But for the disabled, any mercy was fleeting, buried under layers of superstition and struggle. Imagine the cold seeping into your bones as you lie in a filthy alley, hunger gnawing at your gut. Every sound a potential threat. A single misstep could end you, whether from starvation exposure or the cruelty of those who see you as less than human. The Middle Ages didn't just challenge the disabled. It sought to erase them, turning every moment into a desperate fight for breath. Yet understanding this brutal reality is only the beginning. The romanticized tales of charity and kindness often obscure a darker truth, one we must confront to grasp the full weight of their world. The notion of medieval compassion often gets painted with a rosy brush, as if charity flowed freely in a harsh world. But the reality bites harder than the myth. While churches stood as the primary source of aid during the Middle Ages, their resources were a mere trickle against a tide of need. A crippled man, hobbling to a monastery in 1320, might receive a scrap of bread only to be turned away when the meager stores ran dry. Charity wasn't a guarantee. It was a gamble dependent on the whims of overtaxed clergy or the fleeting generosity of a passerby. Dig deeper, and even the spiritual beliefs tied to aid reveal a stark edge. Many thought disabilities could be miraculously healed by touching holy relics. Imagine a blind woman in 1280 pressing her hands to a saint's bone, praying for sight that never comes. This wasn't compassion, it was desperation dressed as hope. Scholars still clash over whether religious teachings sparked genuine kindness or merely performative pity, a public show to ease the giver's conscience rather than the sufferer's pain. A leper might be fed one day as an act of piety, only to be shunned the next when the crowd's mood shifted. Building on the grim survival odds we've already uncovered, it's clear that romanticized views of medieval mercy crumble under scrutiny. The church's role, while vital, couldn't mask the scarcity of true support. Pity often stopped at prayers, rarely extending to sustained help. A deaf beggar in 1350 might hear whispered blessings, but his empty stomach felt the weight of neglect. The era's charity was a patchwork uneven and frail, leaving most disabled souls to fend for themselves in a world quick to judge and slow to care. This fractured reality of so-called compassion sets the stage for a darker truth about how the disabled were viewed and treated. Understanding these gaps in kindness reveals why survival was such a brutal feat, especially when society's gaze turned from pity to punishment. The harsh lens through which disability was seen often branded it as something far worse than a mere burden. In the Middle Ages, disability wasn't just a personal struggle, it was a public condemnation. From the 5th to the 15th centuries, a broken body or mind often branded you as cursed, a living symbol of divine punishment. Superstition ruled hearts and minds, casting the disabled as sinners, bearing God's wrath, or worse, as burdens unworthy of care. A blind child in a 13th century village faced whispers of ancestral sin, her family shamed into hiding her. Society didn't offer support. It built walls of scorn and isolation around those who couldn't conform. This brutal mindset stripped the disabled of basic humanity. Lepers, their flesh marred by disease, were forced to wear bells, a grim warning to others as they shuffled through towns like outcasts. In 1350, England, one such soul trudged alone his bell, tolling a lonely dirge, signaling not just illness, but exile. The mentally afflicted fared no better. Deemed possessed, they endured mockery or restraint, their anguish a spectacle for the masses. Physical deformities too marked you as other, a target for fear or ridicule, with no place in a world obsessed with wholeness. Historians still grapple with the intent behind this exclusion. Some argue isolation aimed to protect society from perceived threats like contagion or spiritual corruption. Others see it as pure punishment, a way to purge the unclean from communal life. Regardless, the result was the same, a life of rejection where survival hinged on enduring relentless judgment. Picture the muddy, treacherous streets we've walked before. Now imagine navigating them, blind, crippled, or shunned with every step, a reminder of your supposed worthlessness. This era's cruelty wasn't just physical, it was woven into belief itself. Disability became a moral failing, a stain that justified neglect. A man raving in a 1400 market tied to a post for sport wasn't seen as ill, but as a fool, his suffering entertainment. Such harshness defined their reality, setting the stage for unimaginable daily struggles. With this foundation of fear and exclusion in mind, we're poised to uncover what a single day held for those marked by disability in this unforgiving world. Waking up in the year 1300 as a disabled person in a medieval village is a brutal test of endurance from the very first moment. The dawn barely creeps through the cracks of a crumbling shack, and already the weight of survival presses down. If you're blind, the world is an unseen maze of danger. Every step risks a fall into a ditch of filth or a collision with a cart. If you've lost a limb, dragging yourself from a straw pile is an agonizing feat, your body screaming with each move. And if your mind is fractured, deemed mad by those around you, the whispers of demons and curses haunt even your quietest thoughts. This isn't just hardship. It's a daily battle where the odds are stacked against you. The harsh streets soaked in mud and manure become your battlefield before the sun is fully up. For the blind, navigating this treacherous terrain means relying on a stick or a memorized path, but one wrong turn sends you sprawling into an open sewer, the stench clinging to your ragged clothes. A man with one leg barely able to hobble with a crude crutch feels every jolt of pain as he inches toward the village square, hoping for a scrap of mercy. Meanwhile, a woman whose mind wanders is kept hidden in a damp cellar by her family out of shame or protection, no one can say for sure. Historians still debate whether such isolation was a shield from cruelty or a deeper wound of rejection. Either way, the result is the same: a life erased from the community's heartbeat. By mid-morning, hunger gnaws at your insides, a relentless enemy no one can escape. Most disabled individuals in the Middle Ages lived in crushing poverty, their survival hinging on begging or the fleeting kindness of family. A blind beggar sitting by a church gate extends trembling hands, only to be met with suspicion. Some passers-by mutter accusations of fakery, believing he's pretending for pity. It's a bizarre twist of cruelty, this notion that suffering could be a lie. Yet it was common enough to sting. A crust of bread might come, but often it's snatched by a stray dog or a quicker hand. If you're lucky to have kin, they might spare a morsel, though their own bellies growl just as fiercely. The struggle for food isn't just physical. It's a daily humiliation, a reminder of your dependence in a world that scorns weakness. As noon burns overhead, the village buzzes with activity, but you're a shadow on its edges. Work, the lifeline of medieval life, is a distant dream for the disabled. A man missing an arm can't wield a plow or hammer, so he lingers near the market, hoping for odd tasks, only to be shooed away as a burden. If you're blind, even simple chores like fetching water become impossible without help, and help is rarely given freely. Some families hide their disabled kin, fearing the stigma that clings to imperfection, though whether this hiding stems from love or disgrace remains a point of contention among scholars. The result is a suffocating isolation where the world moves on without you, and your worth is measured in whispers of pity or disdain. Afternoon brings no relief, only the weight of hours stretching endlessly. Physical pain compounds with every movement, open sores on a crippled leg fester without care, while untreated injuries throb with each heartbeat. For those deemed mad, the torment is internal, a storm of thoughts no one understands, often met with restraint or mockery rather than comfort. A young man prone to fits might be tied to a post in the village square, gawked at by children who throw pebbles for sport. There's no medicine, no solace, just the raw grind of enduring until the day's end. The muddy, perilous streets you woke to remain a constant threat, a reminder of the unforgiving world introduced earlier in our journey, a world that offers no quarter to those who falter. As dusk falls, exhaustion battles with the cold seeping into your bones. Finding shelter is a desperate gamble. A blind woman turned away from every door curls up beneath a market stall, the night air biting at her frail frame. A limbless veteran, once a soldier of honor, drags himself to a stable, praying the hay offers some warmth, though dampness soaks through by midnight. If you're hidden away by family, the darkness of a cellar or attic is your prison, the silence broken only by your own ragged breaths. Sleep, if it comes, is fitful, haunted by hunger and the uncertainty of whether tomorrow will dawn at all. Survival isn't guaranteed. It's a miracle wrested from a world that seems designed to crush you. This relentless cycle, waking to pain, struggling for scraps, enduring scorn, and collapsing into uneasy rest, defines a typical day for the disabled in the Middle Ages. Yet, beneath this grind lies a deeper story of resilience and desperation, of finding ways to persist when every door slams shut. These daily battles set the stage for understanding the broader challenges and survival strategies that shaped their lives, a reality we'll uncover next as we delve into how they fought to defy the odds stacked so cruelly against them. Surviving as a disabled person in the Middle Ages meant facing a relentless barrage of obstacles with no reprieve in sight. Picture a world devoid of medicine, mobility, aids, or any form of safety net. A blind man in a 14th century village stumbles through streets of churned mud and waste, every step a gamble against unseen hazards like open sewers or stray livestock. Without canes or guides, his world is a maze of danger where a single misstep could mean injury or worse. For someone with a missing limb, even crawling to a nearby field to scavenge for food becomes a grueling ordeal, their body aching from the strain, hands raw from the dirt, with no crutch or support to ease the burden. Physical barriers were only part of the struggle. The absence of medical care turned minor ailments into death sentences. A festering wound on a crippled laborer's leg, untreated due to the lack of skilled healers, could rot into gangrene within days. Leper houses, meant as refuges for those afflicted with the disfiguring disease, often became places of utter neglect. In 1300, a leper in Norfolk might wake in a damp, crumbling shack, fingers and toes gone, with nothing but stale crusts to eat, while overseers pocketed meager donations meant for care. These houses weren't sanctuaries, they were prisons where starvation rivaled the disease as a killer. The medieval world offered no bandages, no herbs beyond superstition, and certainly no hope of recovery for those already marked by disability. Beyond the body's frailties, social survival demanded cunning and endurance. Begging emerged as a primary means of sustenance for many, but it was a precarious lifeline. A deaf woman in 1330 stands at the edge of a bustling market, hands outstretched for mercy, only to be shoved into the filth by a passerby who snarls at her presence. Coins were rare, kicks and insults far more common, yet some found unique ways to scrape by, turning to the edges of society for a sliver of income. A blind man in a 1390 tavern, his voice raw but determined, sings ballads or spins tales for a handful of pennies, enduring jeers and thrown scraps as the price of survival. Mockery stung, but hunger bit deeper, forcing the disabled to swallow their pride for the chance at another day. Gleaning offered another desperate option, though it demanded grueling effort. In the aftermath of harvest, a one-legged woman in 1330 crawls through sharp stubble in a harvested field, her hands bleeding as she picks at stray grains of wheat, barely enough for a mouthful. Each movement is agony, her body protesting, yet stopping means starvation. Unlike begging, this labor offered a shred of independence, but at a brutal cost to both body and spirit. The medieval landscape was unforgiving, its fields vast and harsh, leaving no mercy for those already broken by circumstance. Superstition, as we've seen in the scorn heaped upon the disabled, only deepened these daily struggles. A limping man, branded as cursed by divine wrath, might be denied even the smallest charity by villagers fearing his presence could taint their luck. Families driven by shame or dread often hid their disabled kin, locking a mentally afflicted daughter in a cellar rather than face communal judgment. Survival wasn't just about finding food or shelter. It was about navigating a society that saw disability as a stain, a mark of sin to be shunned or exploited. The weight of such beliefs turned every interaction into a battle for dignity, one often lost before it began. Even the sparse aid available came with strings or peril. Charity from churches, while a flicker of hope was fleeting and insufficient. A crippled boy in 1370 might hobble to a monastery gate only to receive a moldy scrap of bread before being turned away into the biting cold. Winter magnified every hardship, transforming alleys and ditches into icy graves for those without shelter. The disabled already weakened faced frostbite or death as they curled into whatever corner they could find, their breath fogging in the freezing air, fading with each shiver. Nature itself became an enemy as merciless as the society around them. Historians still debate whether begging or these other tactics provided any true path to long-term survival. Some argue that the constant humiliation and physical toll made such strategies unsustainable, mere delays of an inevitable end. Others suggest that for a few, these acts of grit carved out a fragile existence, a testament to human will against crushing odds. What's undeniable is the sheer ingenuity required to endure even a single day, whether through song scavenging or silent pleas for mercy. Each choice carried risk. Each moment demanded a fight that most of us today can scarcely imagine. These challenges weren't abstract. They were the grinding reality that shaped every hour for the disabled in the Middle Ages. Yet, amidst this bleakness, there's a thread of something more, something that speaks to the core of what it means to be human. That thread of endurance, of refusing to be erased despite every hardship, sets the stage for understanding the incredible resilience and spirit that defined so many lives in this unforgiving era. Survival in the Middle Ages, as a disabled person, demanded a strength that bordered on the impossible. Amidst the scorn, the hunger, and the unrelenting cold, countless individuals clung to life with a ferocity that defies comprehension. Their endurance wasn't just about outlasting a brutal world. It was a quiet rebellion against a society that deemed them unworthy. Picture a blind man shivering in a damp alley, his hands raw from begging, yet still whispering a prayer for another dawn. This unyielding human spirit carved out slivers of hope where none seemed possible. Monasteries, though often stingy with aid, became a lifeline for some. A crippled woman in 1320, unable to walk since a childhood accident, found shelter within stone wall. She swept floors with trembling arms, earning a scrap of bread and a straw mat to sleep on. Her role was small, her body broken, but her persistence secured a fragile safety others could only dream of. The monks didn't always act out of kindness. Sometimes it was piety for show, but for her it meant survival. Historians still debate if such resilience was the norm or a rare spark. Yet, her story stands as proof that even the smallest foothold could sustain a battered life. Others turned their disabilities into unexpected strengths, defying the mockery that shadowed their every step. Blind bards emerged, their sight stolen, but their memories sharp as steel. In a smoky 1350 tavern, one such man recited epic tales of knights and dragons, his voice weaving magic for a crowd that tossed him meager coins. His fingers strummed a worn lute, each note a triumph over the darkness that encased him. Crowds might jeer, calling him cursed, but his stories outlived their taunts, preserving fragments of a culture that otherwise shunned him. This ingenuity wasn't just survival, it was a reclamation of dignity in a world eager to strip it away. Endurance often meant facing the raw elements with nothing but sheer will. Winter was a merciless foe, claiming countless lives in its icy grip. A deaf beggar in 1370, unable to hear warnings of a coming storm, huddled beneath a tattered cloak in a frozen field. His fingers turned blue, his breath shallow, Yet he pressed on, scavenging for any morsel to stave off starvation. Each gust of wind was a blade against his skin, but surrender wasn't an option. His story, like so many, went unrecorded, yet it echoes the countless unseen battles fought by those society cast aside. Their grit wasn't celebrated. It was invisible, yet no less real. Hunger gnawed constantly, a companion as relentless as the cold. A one-armed man in 1290, unable to wield tools or farm scoured village edges for discarded scraps. He endured kicks from passers-by, their insults branding him a leech, yet he returned each day, driven by a primal need to live. His stomach ached, his frame withered, but his spirit refused to break. Such determination wasn't born of hope for a better tomorrow. It was forged in the desperate now, a refusal to let cruelty claim the final victory. Scholars argue over whether this tenacity was widespread or exceptional, but each act of perseverance chipped away at the narrative of worthlessness imposed upon them. Beyond physical survival, there was a deeper fight to be seen as human. A woman with a twisted leg in 1340, shunned by her own kin, sat at the village well each morning, offering a weary smile to anyone who met her gaze. Most turned away, whispering of divine punishment, yet she persisted, her presence a silent demand for acknowledgement. Her resilience wasn't in labor or song, but in refusing to vanish into the shame others thrust upon her. This quiet defiance, often overlooked by history, was as powerful as any bard's tale, a reminder that humanity persists even when denied. The limited charity of the era, often tied to religious duty, shaped these stories of endurance. While churches and monasteries offered fleeting aid, it was never enough yet. For some, it was the difference between life and death. A leper in 1310, his body marked by sores, found refuge in a chapel's shadow, fed sporadically by a monk's pity. He bore the weight of isolation, yet clung to those rare moments of kindness as proof he still mattered. These acts of mercy, though inconsistent, fueled the will to press on, even as the world turned its back. This unbreakable spirit, woven through hunger, cold, and rejection, reveals a truth about the human condition. It wasn't just about surviving 24 hours. In a merciless age, it was about asserting existence against all odds. The disabled of the Middle Ages, though erased from many records, left an indelible mark through their refusal to be forgotten. Their stories pave the way for understanding individual lives that embody this resilience, like that of a blind tailor in 1300 London, whose own journey through darkness offers a personal glimpse into this enduring fight. In the heart of London, around the year 1300, a man named John carved out a modest life with the delicate precision of needle and thread. As a tailor, his hands were his fortune, stitching garments for merchants and townsfolk, with a skill that earned him respect in the bustling, grimy streets. His fingers danced over fabric, crafting tunics and cloaks under the dim flicker of a tallow candle, a quiet pride in every seam. But fate, as it so often did in the Middle Ages, struck with cruel indifference. Cataracts crept into his eyes, a slow theft of light that began as a blur and deepened into an unyielding darkness. By the time he reached his middle years, John's world had shrunk to shadows and memories, his once steady hands now trembling with uncertainty. Blindness in the 1300s wasn't just a personal loss. It was a societal exile. Without the aid of modern medicine, conditions like cataracts were a common scourge, often born from untreated injuries, infections, or the sheer wear of a harsh life. For a tailor whose livelihood depended on the sharpest of senses, this affliction was a death knell to his craft. Unlike farmers who might still toil by feel, or laborers who could lean on brute strength, John's trade demanded sight threading, needles, cutting patterns, inspecting stitches. There's a bitter irony in the fact that tailors of the era were sometimes known to work by touch for minor tasks, relying on muscle memory for simple repairs. Yet, for a man fully blind, the complexity of his art became an impossible barrier, a wall of darkness no amount of familiarity could breach. Born likely in the late 13th century, John's early life unfolded in a London of muddy lanes and timbered hovels, a city pulsing with trade, yet steeped in hardship. As a young man before the cataracts claimed his vision, he would have learned his trade through grueling apprenticeship, enduring long hours for little pay under a master's stern eye. His days were filled with the clatter of market stalls and the stench of open sewers just beyond his workshop door, a constant reminder of the fragile balance of survival. Back then, his skill was his shield, a way to rise above the filth and secure a place in a community that valued utility above all. He might have married, perhaps fathered children, building a life stitch by stitch, unaware of the calamity waiting to unravel it. When blindness struck, the vibrant tapestry of John's existence faded to a void. The workshop that once echoed with purpose fell silent. The tools he wielded with confidence became relics of a lost identity. In medieval society, a man without work was a man without worth, and for the disabled, this judgment cut deeper still. The streets he once navigated with ease, those same treacherous paths of mud and waste we've seen as daily hazards transformed into a labyrinth of peril. A simple journey to the market risked a tumble into a ditch or a collision with a cart, each step a gamble against injury or mockery. His hands, still nimble in memory, could no longer earn him bread, forcing him to confront a grim new reality in a world that offered no mercy to those who faltered. Historians often debate whether the urban disabled like John in London fared better than their rural counterparts due to the proximity of charity from churches or wealthier patrons. In a city, alms might be more plentiful, with monasteries and parish priests occasionally doling out scraps or shelter. Yet this advantage was a double-edged sword. Urban crowds also meant more scorn, more competition among beggars, and a greater chance of being branded a fraud or a burden. John's plight, rooted in a trade so tied to sight, highlights how disability could strip away not just income, but the very essence of one's role in society. A rural blind man might still gather firewood by feel guided by familiar fields, but in London's chaotic sprawl, Han's skills were rendered useless, his survival now hinging on the fickle pity of strangers. The loss of vision marked the end of John's life, as he knew it, plunging him into a struggle far beyond the physical. It severed his ties to the community that once valued his work, recasting him as an outcast in a society quick to equate disability with divine disfavor. His early years of toil and achievement became a distant echo, overshadowed by the harsh truth of his new existence. But this is merely the beginning of his journey through a merciless world. How John adapted to this darkness, facing hunger, danger, and derision in the unforgiving streets of London, reveals the true depth of his battle, a battle that will unfold as we delve into the major struggles that defined his days. John, once a respected tailor in the heart of London, now gropes through a world of eternal darkness. Cataracts have stripped him of sight, and with it his place in society. Each morning in the year 1300, he wakes on a pile of damp straw in a crumbling shack, the air thick with the stench of rot and refuse. His first steps outside are a gamble muddy streets churned with waste swallow, his footing sending him sprawling into a ditch, sharp stones biting into his knees. Laughter pierces the air as children spot him, their cruel chants of cursed blind man ringing in his ears, followed by the sting of pebbles they hurl without mercy. Hunger gnaws at John's gut by midday as he stumbles toward a church, a place where pity might linger. His trembling hands reach out, pleading for a scrap of bread, a morsel to dull the ache. But kindness is scarce. A burly merchant shoves him aside, snarling, "Get a trade, you fraud." A woman tosses a moldy crust his way, only for a stray dog to snatch it before he can grasp it. The humiliation burns deeper than the hunger, each rejection a reminder that he's no longer a man, but a burden, a shadow, to be scorned. In a city teeming with life, John is invisible unless he's a target for mockery. Urban streets like London's are crowded with beggars drawn by the sheer density of people in 1300. The competition for charity is fierce, and John, blind and defenseless, often loses out. He can't see the hands that push him or the feet that trip him, but he feels every blow. Children, emboldened by the cruelty of their elders, make sport of him, pelting stones or tugging at his ragged cloak for laughs. Each day is a gauntlet of small torments, a relentless assault on his dignity as much as his body. The lack of any safety net, no family to shield him, no guild to claim him, leaves John utterly exposed to the city's harsh whims. As dusk falls, the dangers shift, but don't lessen. John crawls toward a stable, the only shelter he can find, collapsing into a bed of damp hay. The cold seeps into his brittle bones, a merciless companion to the hunger that claws at his insides. He curls up shivering, unable to see the rats that skitter nearby, or the thieves who might prey on a helpless man in the night. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful, haunted by the fear that he might not wake at all. A single day in John's life is an endurance test each hour, a battle against a world that sees his blindness not as a misfortune, but as a mark of worthlessness. Historians still debate the true nature of begging in medieval times. Some argue it reinforced stigma, painting the disabled as leeches on society, deepening the scorn they faced. Others suggest it occasionally stirred pity, fostering fleeting moments of community compassion among those who gave alms. For John, though such debates are distant, his reality is the cold stone under his knees, the jeers echoing in his ears, the constant threat of violence or starvation. Whether his begging sparks disdain or mercy, it's his only lifeline, a humiliating necessity in a city that offers no other path. The absence of safety nets, a struggle shared by countless others across the medieval landscape, defines John's existence. There are no leper houses for the blind, no monasteries guaranteed to take him in. Charity, when it comes, is a whim, not a right, a crust of bread one day, a turned back the next. Winter looms as a deadly specter, promising nights where the cold could claim him as easily as hunger. A blind man in London's alleys has no shield against the elements, no promise of warmth or food to carry him through to morning. John's struggles strip bare the brutal truth of disability in the Middle Ages. His blindness isn't merely a loss of sight. It's a theft of safety, dignity, and hope. Every step he takes is a roll of dice, every plea for help a risk of further shame. London's streets, bustling with trade and life, are a battlefield for a man who cannot see a place where survival is not just unlikely, but a daily defiance of the odds. And yet, John persists, driven by a quiet, stubborn will to face another dawn, even if it brings more of the same. This relentless fight, this unyielding grip on life, paves the way to understanding the lasting imprint of his story, a testament to the unseen battles fought by so many like him. John, the blind tailor of London, lived a life cloaked in darkness, his once nimble fingers stilled by cataracts, his days reduced to begging in a city that scorned him. Yet, his story, though etched in the margins of history, carries a weight that echoes beyond the muddy streets of 1300. His struggle wasn't just a personal battle against hunger and cold. It stands as a piercing symbol of the countless unseen lives of the disabled in the Middle Ages, individuals whose pain and perseverance were rarely recorded, often forgotten. Most disabled people from that era left no trace, no parchment to bear their names, no stone to mark their passing. Their existence was a whisper drowned out by the clamor of a world obsessed with strength and wholeness. While John's daily fight for survival revealed the raw cruelty of medieval society, his enduring presence in our retelling uncovers a deeper truth. His life, pieced together from fragments of folklore and sparse records, challenges us to see beyond the stigma that branded him as cursed. In local tales, blind beggars like John sometimes became figures of myth dubbed cursed souls by villagers who spun stories of divine wrath around their suffering. One quirky thread of legend even suggests that a blind man's plea for alms could carry a hidden curse or a blessing, depending on the listener's heart. Such stories, though steeped in superstition, kept figures like John alive in the collective memory, even if their real names faded. John's tale forces us to confront how history remembers or fails to remember the disabled. His resilience, mirrored in the quiet endurance of so many others, paints a picture of a community invisible to chroniclers, yet vital to understanding the era's true fabric. Historians grapple with this very issue, debating how personal stories like his shape our view of medieval disability. Some argue these narratives reveal a hidden undercurrent of compassion, suggesting that not all saw the disabled as mere burdens. Others counter that focusing on individuals risks romanticizing a time of systemic neglect, where survival was the exception, not the norm. What's undeniable is that John's life, though uncelebrated in his time, offers a lens to see the broader struggle, a struggle where every day was a defiance of a world that turned away. Consider the sheer anonymity of most disabled lives then. Unlike nobles or knights whose deeds were scribed in detail. A blind tailor's triumphs were mundane yet monumental, surviving a winter's night, securing a crust of bread, enduring the taunts of a crowd. These small victories went unwritten, yet they were as heroic as any battlefield charge. John's story, though unique in its details, likely mirrored thousands of others whose names we'll never know. A crippled farmer in a distant village, a deaf child hidden by a fearful family, a mad woman chained in a churchyard. All fought the same silent war against a society that offered no quarter. Their absence from history books isn't just a gap. It's a wound, a reminder of how easily humanity can erase its own. Reflecting on John connects directly to the broader spirit of resilience that defined so many disabled lives in the Middle Ages. Despite the scorn, the hunger, the bone-deep cold of a London alley, he persisted, as did others who found ways to carve out existence in a world that wished them gone. His legacy isn't in grand monuments or sweeping reforms. It's in the stubborn refusal to vanish entirely. That refusal speaks to a human strength that no amount of cruelty could extinguish. It's a strength that whispers through the centuries, urging us to look closer at the overlooked, to hear the stories that were never meant to be told. John's life also raises critical questions about how we interpret the past. If one man's struggle can illuminate so much about an era's darkness, what else have we missed? How many other Johns walked those streets, their footsteps erased by time? The debate among scholars persists. Do these personal accounts give us a fuller picture of medieval disability, or do they skew our understanding by highlighting rare survivors over the many who perished unnoticed? One side holds that stories like his humanize history, showing that even in brutality there was individuality and grit. The opposing view warns that such focus might obscure the overwhelming systemic rejection that defined most disabled lives, painting a falsely hopeful image of a merciless age. Ultimately, John's legacy isn't just about his own endurance. It's about forcing us to acknowledge the vast, silent chorus of those who shared his fate. His story, though incomplete, is a thread in a tapestry of struggle that history often ignores. It compels us to dig deeper, to seek out the voices buried beneath centuries of indifference. And as we piece together these fragments, we find not just suffering, but a profound will to live, a will that sets the stage for understanding even darker chapters of medieval cruelty. The public spectacles of humiliation, where the disabled were turned into entertainment, build on this very foundation of societal scorn, revealing how far that indifference could stretch into outright malice. In the heart of medieval towns, where cobblestones echoed with the clamor of daily life. A darker form of entertainment often unfolded. Public spectacles designed to amuse the masses frequently turned into cruel displays of power over the most vulnerable. Among these events, targeting the disabled stood out as particularly brutal, revealing a society that found sport in suffering. One chilling example emerges from 1425 Paris, where blind men were forced into a grotesque game, pitted against a pig. In a makeshift arena, their struggle met with roaring laughter from the crowd. This wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern where disability became a public punchline. Such events were not mere accidents of cruelty. They were deeply embedded in the fabric of medieval entertainment. Townsfolk, from laborers to local elites, gathered for festivals and market days where spectacles like jousts or executions were commonplace. But when the disabled were thrust into these arenas, the intent shifted from awe to derision. The blind, the limbless, even those deemed mad, were often chosen as targets, their physical or mental differences exploited for cheap laughs. Crowds placed bets on the outcomes, turning human misery into a gambling game. A blind man stumbling after a squealing pig wasn't just a jest. It was a transaction where coins changed hands over his humiliation. The roots of this cruelty trace back to the stigma that branded disability as a mark of divine disfavor or moral failing. Building on the harsh superstitions that painted the disabled as cursed or sinful, these public events became a stage to reinforce societal hierarchies. By mocking the weak, the crowd asserted their own superiority, their laughter a shield against the fear of becoming other themselves. A man with a hunched back or a woman with trembling limbs wasn't seen as a neighbor in need, but as a symbol of what to avoid, a living lesson, paraded for all to scorn. This wasn't compassion disguised as jest. It was a deliberate act to dehumanize, to draw a line between the whole and the broken. Yet beneath the jeers, there's a complexity historians grapple with. Some argue these events served a twisted social function, acting as a release valve for a society under constant strain from plague, war, and hunger. In a world where death loomed daily, laughing at another's misfortune might have dulled the edge of personal fears. Others contend it was pure sadism, a cultural norm that normalized cruelty as entertainment. Imagine the scene in 1425 Paris. Blind men, disoriented and defenseless, handed crude weapons or left to flail bare-handed, while spectators cheered not for their courage, but for their inevitable failure. Was this a communal bonding over shared superiority, or simply a mob reveling in pain? The debate lingers, but the suffering at the center remains undeniable. These spectacles also reveal the economic underbelly of medieval life. Organizing such events often fell to guilds or local lords who saw profit in public amusement. A cruel game drew crowds, filled taverns, and boosted market sales, turning human dignity into a commodity. For the disabled participants, involvement was rarely a choice. Desperation for coin or food or outright coercion pushed them into the ring. A blind beggar starving on the streets might grasp at the promise of a crust of bread, only to find himself the centerpiece of a jeering mob. The irony cuts deep in a society that offered no safety net. Even the meager chance of survival came at the cost of one's humanity. Beyond the immediate cruelty, these events cemented a lasting image of the disabled as objects of ridicule rather than individuals with worth. Each laugh, each bet, each cheer etched deeper the notion that disability equaled inferiority, a belief that echoed through laws, sermons, and daily interactions. A child watching a limbless man mocked in the town square learned not to help but to scorn. A merchant betting on a blind man's fall carried that disdain into his dealings, refusing alms or work to those marked by difference. The public stage became a school of prejudice, teaching generations to see the disabled not as kin, but as jests. The weight of these humiliations extends beyond the moment, shaping how we understand medieval attitudes toward vulnerability. While personal stories of struggle reveal quiet endurance, public events like these expose the overt cruelty that framed daily life for the disabled. They weren't just fighting hunger or cold. They were battling a society that found entertainment in their pain. This grim reality ends the stage for a closer look at one such event where the brutality of 1425 Paris unfolds in stark detail, revealing the true cost of being disabled in a world that laughed at weakness. In the heart of Paris, 1425, a chilling spectacle unfolds, one that strips away any illusion of medieval compassion for the disabled. On a crisp spring day, a crowd gathers in a muddy square, their cheers rising like a storm. At the center of this chaos stands a makeshift ring where 4 blind men, stripped of dignity, are forced into a brutal game. Their opponent, a pig, wild and unpredictable, chosen deliberately for the cruel amusement it promises. Local elites and guilds orchestrate this event, turning human suffering into public entertainment. The blind men, armed only with flimsy sticks, stumble and swing blindly, their every miss met with roars of laughter from the onlookers. The pig squeals and charges, knocking one man to the ground, his cries drowned out by the crowd's delight. Bruises bloom on pale skin, and the air thickens with the stench of sweat and filth. Yet the game continues relentless. This isn't an isolated act of cruelty. It's a calculated display, designed to reinforce the boundaries between the whole and the broken. The blind men, already outcasts in a society that brands their disability as divine punishment, are reduced to mere pawns in this grotesque theater. Some in the crowd place bets, wagering on which man will fall first, or if the pig will draw blood. The unpredictability of the animal heightens the so-called sport, each chaotic lunge drawing gasps and jeers. A man's stick snaps under the pig's weight, leaving him defenseless, sprawled in the dirt, while spectators howl. Another swings wildly, striking a fellow contestant by mistake, and the crowd erupts, finding humor in their pain. The event drags on, each moment a fresh wound to their humanity, until the men are left battered, exhausted, and humiliated, their spirits as broken as their bodies. Digging deeper into this horror, historians grapple with the motivations behind such participation. Were these blind men coerced, forced into the ring by threats or desperation for a few coins? Or did they step forward willingly, driven by the gnawing hunger that defined their daily existence? Evidence suggests a grim mix of both. In a world where begging often yielded nothing but scorn, a coin or a crust of bread, however earned, could mean survival for another day. Yet the power imbalance is undeniable. Those organizing the event held all the cards, exploiting the vulnerable for profit and prestige. One account hints at a blind man who resisted, only to be dragged into the ring, by force his protests ignored. The crowd, complicit in this cruelty, sees not individuals but caricatures their laughter, a shield against any flicker of guilt or empathy. The brutality of the scene paints a stark picture of societal attitudes. Each blow endured by these men echoes the broader scorn faced by the disabled across medieval Europe. Their struggle mirrors the daily battles of figures like John the blind tailor of London, whose own streets offered mockery instead of mercy. Here, in this Paris square, the physical wounds are matched by an invisible violence, the erosion of worth, the message that their lives are fodder for amusement. As the game nears its end, the crowd's energy peaks, some shouting encouragements, not out of kindness, but to prolong the spectacle. A final stumble, a final cheer, and the men are led away limping and dazed, their tormentors already planning the next cruel diversion. The square empties, leaving behind trampled earth and the lingering echo of laughter, a testament to a world that thrives on exclusion. Stepping back, the mechanics of this event reveal a chilling efficiency. Guilds and local leaders, often the very ones who controlled charity and aid, turn their influence to darker ends here. They select participants with precision, knowing blind men already marginalized will draw a crowd eager for novelty. The pig, a common farm animal, becomes a weapon of chaos, its natural aggression exploited for maximum effect. Historical records note that such events were advertised days in advance, ensuring a packed audience, with some spectators traveling from nearby villages for the show. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was a business, a ritual of dominance cloaked as festivity. The blind men, whether paid a pittance or not, bear the true cost, their bodies and souls scarred in ways no coin can heal. As the dust settles on this harrowing display, a deeper unease emerges about what it reveals of medieval society. The cheers of the crowd, the indifference of the organizers, the suffering of the participants, all point to a culture that normalizes such degradation. Yet this event is more than a moment of cruelty. It's a window into the systemic forces that shaped life for the disabled in this era. What drives a society to find joy in such pain, and what scars does it leave on both the victims and the witnesses? These questions linger heavy with implications as we turn to the aftermath of this humiliation and the broader consequences it carries for those already pushed to the margins. The echoes of laughter from the 1425 Paris spectacle linger, a bitter reminder of the cost borne by the disabled in such public humiliations. These events, where blind men were forced to battle a pig for the amusement of crowds, stripped away more than just physical safety. They shredded dignity, leaving wounds deeper than any blade could carve. Each jeer, each bet placed on their struggle cemented a harsh truth. To be disabled in the Middle Ages was to be less than human in the eyes of many. Society didn't just watch it actively, reinforced the notion that weakness deserved mockery, that suffering was a sport. These humiliations had a lasting impact, embedding negative stereotypes into the cultural fabric. The blind, already burdened by superstition as sinners or frauds, became symbols of ridicule, their every misstep a punchline. A man who stumbled in that Paris ring wasn't just a victim of the day. His story spread through taverns and markets, painting all disabled as objects of scorn. This wasn't mere entertainment. It was a deliberate act of dehumanization, ensuring that any flicker of compassion was snuffed out by laughter. The consequences rippled outward, hardening hearts and justifying neglect. Why aid someone you've been taught to despise? Yet amidst the cruelty, fragments of remorse surface in unexpected places. Written accounts from the time reveal A few spectators who later grappled with guilt, their words hinting at unease over the spectacle they cheered. A merchant's diary from 1425 confesses a sleepless night haunted by the sight of a blind man battered and bleeding. Another, a cleric, questions in his notes if such games mocked God's creation more than honored it. These rare reflections pierce the era's callousness, showing that even in a world steeped in brutality, some felt the weight of their actions. But these flickers of regret were too few, too quiet to shift the tide of societal disdain. The motives behind these events remain shrouded in debate, a puzzle historians still wrestle to solve. Some argue this cruelty was a cultural norm, a release valve for a society under constant strain from plague, war, and hunger. In a world where survival demanded toughness, mocking the weak might have reaffirmed the strength of the many, a twisted bonding ritual. Others counter that these spectacles were aberrations driven by a minority of elites or guilds seeking to flex power over the vulnerable. Was it a shared value to humiliate, or the whim of a cruel few imposed on a crowd eager for distraction? The answer eludes us, but the question burns. What does this say about a society's soul when suffering becomes a game? Digging deeper, the lack of legal protections for the disabled amplified the fallout of such events. Without rights to shield them, those humiliated in public had no recourse, no voice to demand justice. A blind man mocked in Paris couldn't appeal to a court or seek restitution. He was left to bear the shame alone, his status as an outcast cemented by law as much as by laughter. This legal void meant every spectacle was a sentence without appeal, each crowd a judge delivering a verdict of worthlessness. The absence of safeguards didn't just allow cruelty, it encouraged it, turning vulnerability into a public commodity. Beyond the immediate victims, these events shaped how entire communities viewed disability. A child watching the Paris game grew up believing that the disabled deserved derision, not aid. A farmer who laughed carried that contempt back to his village, dismissing a crippled neighbor's plea for help. The cultural stain spread generation by generation, ensuring that stigma wasn't just a moment, but a legacy. Every cheer in that ring built a wall between the disabled and any hope of acceptance, a barrier that stood firm long after the pig was slaughtered and the crowd dispersed. The unanswered questions linger like ghosts over these historical accounts. Did organizers of such events truly believe they served a purpose? Or was it pure malice dressed as tradition? Could a society so steeped in faith reconcile these acts with the teachings of mercy they claimed to uphold? And perhaps most haunting, how many silent voices crushed by such humiliations never reached the pages of history, their pain erased by time. These gaps in understanding challenge us to look closer, to seek the humanity buried beneath centuries of scorn. This reflection on consequences ties directly into the broader systems of aid that existed or failed to in the medieval world. The church and monasteries often positioned themselves as beacons of hope, yet their role in supporting the disabled was complex and often inadequate. With this foundation of societal attitudes in mind, we're ready to explore how medieval charity systems attempted to address or ignored the plight of those deemed unworthy by events like the one in Paris. In the unforgiving landscape of the Middle Ages, charity stood as a fragile thread of hope for the disabled, often woven more for the salvation of the giver than the relief of the receiver. From the 5th to the 15th centuries, churches and monasteries emerged as the primary bastions of aid in a world devoid of safety nets. Their role was pivotal, driven by a deep-rooted belief that acts of piety could secure divine favor. A crippled man in 1290 might shuffle to a monastery gate, his hands trembling for a scrap of bread, finding either a fleeting kindness or a cold dismissal, depending on the day. Monasteries frequently offered shelter or meager meals as expressions of faith, their stone walls a rare refuge against the brutal elements. Picture a blind child in 1320, huddled in a barn corner, a tattered cloak draped over shivering shoulders by a monk whose charity was both a duty and a display. Yet this aid was inconsistent, tethered to the whims of individual priors or the wealth of the region. One day a kind hand might feed a leper, the next, a stern gatekeeper could turn them away into the biting winter wind. Beyond basic sustenance, some monks crafted unique remedies, believing in their healing power. A quirky practice saw them brewing special ales dubbed as medicine for the sick or disabled. Imagine a one-legged beggar in 1340 sipping a bitter draught handed through a convent window, a momentary warmth against the ache of hunger and cold. While such gestures carried a flicker of care, they often masked a deeper truth. Charity was as much about enhancing the status of the institution or donor as it was about genuine compassion. This duality sparks debate among historians. Some argue that medieval charity stemmed from true altruism, a reflection of Christian teachings to love thy neighbor. Others contend it was a calculated act, a public performance to elevate the giver's standing in the eyes of God and community. A wealthy lord in 1360 might parade a limbless recipient before a crowd, basking in praise for his generosity, while the recipient's dignity eroded under scrutinizing gazes. The reality for the disabled was stark. Charity rarely altered their daily grind of exclusion and survival. A deaf woman in 1330 begging at a church door might receive a crust of bread, but the act did little to shield her from the market trader's shove or the villager's scorn. Leper houses, often tied to religious orders, promised care, but frequently became places of neglect. In 1300 Norfolk, a leper might languish in a damp hut, his cries unheard by overseers who pocketed donations meant for his keep. Desperation sometimes boiled over, as seen in 1297 West Somerton, where lepers revolted against such corruption, their frail bodies fueled by raw need. Winter amplified the cruelty of this system. Without consistent shelter, many disabled faced death in frozen alleys or barren fields. A crippled boy in 1370 denied a monastery's warmth, curls into a ditch as snow buries his frail form, his breath fading with no one to witness his end. These fleeting acts of mercy, often vanishing as quickly as they appeared, underscored a harsh truth. Charity was a patchwork, not a foundation for those society deemed broken. While the previous exploration of public humiliation events revealed the depths of societal cruelty, this glimpse into charity systems uncovers a counterpoint, a strained attempt at compassion within a world of scarcity. Yet the disabled remained on the fringes, their survival hinging on chance encounters with kindness rather than any structured support. Monasteries and churches, though central to aid, operated within a framework where spiritual gain often outweighed human relief. This tension between intent and impact lays bare a critical dynamic of medieval life. The disabled, caught between fleeting mercy and persistent neglect, navigated a world where help was never guaranteed. Understanding these charity systems is essential because it sets the stage for grasping how such acts shaped broader societal attitudes toward the vulnerable, revealing whether they softened or merely masked the era's inherent stigma. Charity in the Middle Ages carried a weight far beyond simple acts of giving. It was a thread woven into the very fabric of society, often more about the soul of the donor than the survival of the recipient. For the disabled, who clung to life in a world of mud and misery, charity was a flicker of hope, but one that often dimmed under harsh realities. Its impact on society wasn't just in the meager bread or shelter it provided. It shaped how people viewed worth, sin, and salvation itself. The reach of charity was maddeningly uneven, dictated by region and wealth. In a bustling 14th century English town, a blind beggar might receive a coin from a merchant eager to secure divine favor, while in a remote French village, a crippled child starves unseen by any benefactor. Monasteries and churches, the heart of medieval aid, doled out help inconsistently. A leper in one parish might find a bowl of gruel at a convent gate, but in another He's turned away the monks too poor or indifferent to care. This patchwork system meant survival was a lottery, not a guarantee, leaving the disabled at the mercy of chance. Beyond inconsistency, charity often served a darker purpose: public display over genuine relief. Wealthy donors in 1300s Europe sometimes paraded the disabled. They aided not out of kindness, but to bask in communal praise. Picture a noblewoman in a German market square, handing a tattered cloak to a one-legged man, as onlookers murmur her piety. The act isn't for him, it's a performance, his suffering a prop for her spiritual prestige. This twisted dynamic embedded a subtle cruelty into charity, reinforcing the idea that the disabled were tools for others' redemption, not humans deserving dignity. Even when aid reached the needy, it rarely transformed lives. A deaf woman in 1350 might sleep in a monastery barn for a night, spared the winter's bite, but come morning she's back on the street. Her core struggles unchanged. Charity patched wounds. It didn't heal them. It offered a crust of bread to a limbless veteran, not a path to work or respect. For society, this meant charity became a pressure valve, easing guilt without challenging the deeper scorn or exclusion that branded the disabled as burdens. It allowed communities to feel virtuous while leaving systemic neglect intact. Historians clash over charity's true societal imprint. Some argue it softened the era's brutality, planting seeds of compassion that would later bloom into broader care systems. They point to monks who fed the blind or nuns who tended lepers as proof of a quiet humanity amid the cruelty. Others counter that charity perpetuated stigma, framing the disabled as eternal dependents, objects of pity rather than equals. A leper house in 1290 Norfolk meant, as refuge often doubled as a prison, its occupants displayed to donors like curiosities. This debate cuts to the heart of charity's role. Did it lift society toward empathy or cement the chains of inequality? The cultural ripple of charity also touched how sin and worth were judged. Giving alms to a mad beggar in 1320 wasn't just aid. It was a transaction, a way to cleanse the donor's soul or curry favor with God. Sermons of the time hammered this home. Your charity could buy heavenly credit, especially if given to those seen as God's afflicted. This mindset shifted societal values, tying worth to visible piety. A merchant who tossed coins to a crippled child wasn't just helping. He was signaling his righteousness, shaping a culture where charity was less about need and more about moral currency. Yet, for all its flaws, charity carved a faint outline of communal responsibility. In a world where the disabled were often cast out, shunned as cursed or useless, the act of giving, however imperfect, acknowledged their existence. A one-handed man in 1370 begging at a church door might be scorned by most, but the monk who slips him a loaf creates a tiny bridge, a nod to shared humanity. This grudging recognition, though far from equality, nudged society to grapple with its obligations, even if through a lens of self-interest. Charity's societal shaping wasn't in grand reforms or lasting safety nets, but in these small, conflicted interactions. It mirrored the era's contradictions, faith clashing with fear, generosity tainted by pride. A blind girl in 1340, shivering in a cathedral shadow, might clutch a donated blanket, her body warmed, but her isolation untouched. Society saw her suffering as a chance for others' salvation, not as a call to rethink her place. This tension defined charity's impact, a force that both soothed and sustained the very divisions it sought to bridge. Understanding this complex legacy sets the stage for tracing charity's long shadow into history. How did these medieval acts, so tangled with motive and limitation, lay the groundwork for the systems we know today? That's the next piece of this intricate puzzle. Medieval charity, though flawed and often self-serving, carved a faint path towards something greater, a distant ancestor of the welfare systems we know today. In a world of mud-caked villages and unrelenting hardship, the church and monasteries stood as the primary pillars of aid during the Middle Ages, offering scraps of relief to the disabled who had nowhere else to turn. Their efforts, driven by a mix of piety and social expectation, provided food shelter or a tattered cloak to those society cast aside. Yet, the impact was limited, barely scratching the surface of the deep suffering endured by the blind, the limbless, or the mentally afflicted. Still, these acts of giving planted seeds of organized aid, creating a framework that centuries later would evolve into structured support for the vulnerable. One striking legacy of this era lies in how these early charitable efforts shaped future concepts of communal responsibility. Monasteries, for instance, didn't just hand out bread. They established routines of care, however inconsistent, that hinted at the possibility of systemic relief. A crippled beggar in 1320 might receive a bowl of gruel from a monk not out of pure kindness, but as part of a broader religious duty to demonstrate faith through works. This idea that helping the less fortunate could be a collective obligation echoed through time, influencing the development of almshouses and eventually modern public welfare programs. Historians point to these medieval practices as the embryonic stages of societal safety nets, even if their immediate effect was more symbolic than transformative for the disabled of that time. Beyond practical aid, medieval charity left an unexpected cultural imprint. Some leper houses, grim as they were, became pilgrimage sites, drawing travelers who believed miracles lingered in their walls. In 1290, a decaying shelter in Norfolk transformed into a place of reverence where the afflicted were seen as touched by divine mystery, their suffering a conduit for spiritual awe. This quirk of history reveals how charity, even in its bleakest forms, could shift perceptions, turning outcasts into figures of fascination or veneration. It's a reminder that the medieval mind wove complex narratives around disability, blending pity with superstition and sometimes elevating the downtrodden in ways that defy our modern lens. Yet, the true weight of charity's legacy remains a matter of sharp debate among scholars. Some argue that these early systems of aid were pivotal, laying critical groundwork for later innovations in social care. They see the Church's role as a catalyst inspiring secular institutions to take up the mantle of support in the centuries that followed. A counterview holds that medieval charity's influence is overstated, asserting that its reach was too sporadic and its motives too entangled with personal salvation to truly impact systemic change. After all, a blind woman in 1350 might starve outside a monastery gate if the prior deemed her unworthy, exposing the fragility of such aid. This tension underscores a broader question. Did charity in the Middle Ages genuinely pave the way for modern welfare, or was it merely a fleeting gesture in a sea of indifference? Reflecting on the limited but persistent charity of the era as seen in the fleeting mercy of monasteries, it's clear that even small acts of compassion held potential to ripple through history. The disabled, often surviving on the edge of oblivion, clung to these rare offerings, a crust of bread, a night's shelter, as lifelines in a brutal world. While the immediate relief was minimal, the underlying principle of aiding the helpless began to take root, challenging the notion that suffering was simply a personal burden. This slow shift in thought from individual fate to shared duty marks charity's quiet but enduring place in the story of human progress. Understanding this historical thread is vital because it sets the stage for grasping how medieval society structured itself around the disabled, often placing them at the very bottom of its rigid hierarchy. The echoes of charity's uneven hand reveal why exclusion became so deeply ingrained, shaping a world where the afflicted were not just overlooked, but systematically pushed to the margins. In the unforgiving hierarchy of the Middle Ages, the disabled found themselves anchored at the very bottom, cast aside as broken pieces in a world obsessed with strength and wholeness. From the 5th to the 15th centuries, society was a rigid pyramid, nobles at the apex, peasants toiling below, and the disabled scraping by beneath even the lowest rung. Their exclusion wasn't just a matter of pity or neglect. It was a deliberate design woven into the fabric of laws, guilds, and daily life, ensuring they remained invisible. powerless, and often despised. Guilds, the backbone of medieval economies, enforced strict rules that barred the disabled from meaningful work. A one-handed blacksmith in 1310, once skilled with a hammer, found himself forbidden from joining his trade's guild, his craft outlawed not for lack of talent but for a perceived unfitness. These organizations demanded physical perfection, viewing any impairment as a liability, a stain on their reputation. The result was devastating. Men and women who could have contributed were instead forced into begging or scavenging their potential, buried under arbitrary standards. Beyond the guild's societal roles were equally inaccessible. The disabled were often denied entry into religious orders, a path that offered stability for many in the era. Church laws explicitly banned the blind or limbless from becoming priests, arguing they lacked the wholeness required for her sacred duties. A blind scholar in 1320, fluent in Latin and brimming with devotion, was turned away from the clergy, his knowledge rendered useless by a body deemed unworthy. This exclusion wasn't just economic, it was spiritual, stripping away even the solace of faith's community. Legal systems offered no refuge, only further isolation. The mentally impaired were treated as perpetual children, stripped of autonomy over their own lives. A merchant in 1340, struck by a mental breakdown, lost his shop to a so-called guardian who sold it for personal gain, leaving the man destitute. Wills began excluding the disabled, especially those with mental challenges, labeling them unfit to inherit. A widow in 1360, prone to confusion, watched helplessly as her land passed to a distant cousin, forcing her into the streets to beg for scraps. Competency tests were brutal and humiliating. Officials grilled individuals on memory or emotional stability to judge their sanity, often with devastating outcomes. A farmer in 1380 failed to recall his field's boundaries during such a test. His home was seized and he was cast out into the cold. Even minor impairments could shatter a person's place in society. Women faced harsher scrutiny. A limping seamstress was denied work, not because she couldn't sew, but because her flaw was deemed bad for business. The law wasn't a shield. It was a weapon, cutting the disabled from any chance at stability or dignity. Their lack of legal standing meant they were at the mercy of guardians, neighbors, or corrupt officials who exploited their vulnerability without consequence. Work, the cornerstone of survival, was a distant dream for most. Many disabilities stemmed from labor itself. Masons crushed by falling stones, farmers maimed by plows, soldiers scarred in endless wars. Yet once impaired, these individuals were pushed to the edges of society, their skills discarded. A mason in 1260, his arm severed in a collapse, could no longer lift a hammer. He was replaced and forgotten left to fend for himself in a world that valued only the able-bodied. Desperate trades became their only option. Picking stray grains in harvested fields was grueling but common. A one-legged woman in 1330 crawled through sharp stubble, her hands bleeding for a mere handful of wheat, barely enough to stave off hunger for a day. Others turned to roles of humiliation for survival. Some disabled individuals were forced into becoming jesters, enduring mockery for a few coins. A blind man in 1390 sang in a tavern, his voice drowned out by jeers. As drunks pelted him with bones, his dignity traded for a crust of bread. The rise of a cash economy only deepened their plight. Guilds tightened their grip, shutting out anyone who didn't meet their narrow standards. A deaf carpenter in 1370, capable of crafting fine furniture, was barred from work, his expertise ignored in favor of physical perfection. Even war veterans once celebrated were discarded, a limbless knight in 1350 who had fought for his lord, begged outside the same castle he once defended, ignored by those he protected. This relentless exclusion wasn't merely economic. It was deeply cultural, rooted in a worldview that saw disability as a mark of divine disfavor or moral failing. The disabled weren't just denied jobs or rights. They were denied personhood, reduced to objects of scorn or pity, their place in society not just low, but non-existent. While charity, as we've seen, offered fleeting moments of relief, it did little to challenge this structure, often reinforcing the idea that the disabled were burdens to be managed, not equals to be integrated. Understanding this harsh hierarchy reveals why survival was so precarious for the disabled, setting the stage for the personal conflicts and isolation they faced every day. Their struggle wasn't just against physical or mental limitations, but against a society built to reject them at every turn. In the unforgiving landscape of the Middle Ages, being disabled didn't just mean battling your own body or mind. It meant facing a society that often turned against you. Neighbors, once familiar faces, could become sources of hostility, their whispers of superstition and scorn cutting deeper than any physical wound. The disabled were frequently scapegoated, blamed for misfortunes like failed crops or sudden plagues, as if their mere presence invited divine wrath. A limping man in a 1340 village struggling to carry water might find himself accused of cursing the well, his home pelted with stones under the cover of night. Isolation wasn't just a consequence. It was a deliberate act, a way for communities to purge what they feared or didn't understand. This hostility manifested in stark legal measures that stripped the disabled of belonging. Lepers, their bodies ravaged by disease, faced banishment by law, driven beyond town walls to live in desolate colonies or wander as outcasts. Historical records from 1300s England reveal ordinances that barred lepers from entering markets or touching shared wells, their very existence deemed a threat. Some towns even constructed leper gates, crude barriers designed to keep the afflicted out a physical reminder of their rejection. A leper in 1290, his face wrapped in rags, would stand at such a gate, watching children flee at the sound of his bell, his world shrinking to the edges of human contact. This wasn't protection for the healthy. It was a sentence of solitude, a slow death by neglect, as much as disease. Beyond legal exclusion, social tensions simmered in everyday encounters, often boiling over into cruelty. A blind woman in 1370 begging at a church door might be shoved aside by a merchant who calls her a burden, her pleas drowned out by jeers. The mentally disabled faced even harsher treatment, their unpredictable behavior sparking fear that turned neighbors into tormentors. A man prone to outbursts in a 1350 market could be tied to a post, mocked as a fool, while passers-by threw rotten fruit, his humanity reduced to a spectacle. These weren't isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern where disability became a lightning rod for communal frustration, a way to assert dominance over the vulnerable. The roots of this conflict lay in a medieval mindset that saw difference as danger. Physical deformities or mental struggles were often interpreted as signs of moral failing or demonic influence, turning personal hardship into public judgment. A hunchbacked boy in 1320 might be shunned at a village feast, his family hiding him in shame while gossip brands him as cursed. This cultural lens didn't just isolate it, dehumanized, creating a chasm between the disabled and their communities. Even acts of pity were tainted by this belief. A rare coin tossed to a crippled beggar often came with a muttered prayer to ward off whatever evil they supposedly carried. The weight of such stigma pressed down constantly, making every interaction a potential battle. Yet amidst this rejection, some disabled individuals fought to carve out a space, however small. A deaf man in 1360, unable to hear the taunts, might linger at the edge of a market, bartering scraps of woven cloth for food, his silence a shield against hostility. Others, like lepers, banded together in their exile, formed fragile communities outside town limits, sharing meager resources in defiance of their banishment. These acts of resilience, though, were often invisible to a society that had already turned its back, their struggles buried under layers of fear-driven exclusion. Historians today debate whether this isolation served as a protective measure for towns or simply punished the afflicted, but the lived reality was clear. To be disabled was to be pushed to the margins both physically and emotionally. this pattern of conflict and isolation wasn't merely personal. It echoed the broader societal dynamics of the era. While the previous focus on the structure of medieval society revealed how the disabled were systematically excluded from guilds and roles, here we see the raw human cost of that exclusion in daily life. A one-handed blacksmith barred from his trade by guild rules in 1310 doesn't just lose work. He loses neighbors who once shared ale with him, their camaraderie replaced by cold stares. The disabled weren't just denied opportunity, they were denied community. Their presence, a constant friction point in a world obsessed with order and conformity. The consequences of this isolation rippled through every aspect of life, from survival to spirit. Without the safety of community, a limbless veteran in 1350 sleeping under a hedge faces not just hunger, but the terror of being utterly alone, his cries for help unheard. A woman deemed mad in 1400, locked in a shed by her own kin, doesn't just suffer confinement. She loses the warmth of human connection, her world reduced to shadows and silence. These weren't just physical separations. They were profound emotional wounds inflicted by a society that chose fear over compassion time and again. As we reflect on these stark divisions, it becomes evident that surviving as a disabled person in the Middle Ages meant navigating a battlefield of human prejudice as much as physical hardship. The leper at the gate, the blind beggar in the mud, the mad soul in chains. They weren't just fighting their own limitations, but a world determined to cast them out. This understanding of their isolation and the conflicts they endured lays a crucial foundation, preparing us to revisit the broader journey of their lives and the lessons they impart for our own time. Survival in the Middle Ages, as a disabled person, was a relentless battle against a world that offered no quarter. From the 5th to the 15th centuries, disability often meant a death sentence, not just from physical ailments, but from society's brutal neglect. Waking up blind, limbless, or deemed mad in a muddy village or plague-ridden city, you faced a daily gauntlet of hunger, cold, and scorn. A single day, 24 hours, tested the limits of human endurance, where a blind tailor like John stumbled through London's filth, dodging cruelty for a moldy crust. A limbless veteran like Pierre dragged himself across French fields, gleaning scraps, while fever gnawed at his untreated wounds. And Margaret, labeled mad in an English town, endured chains and exorcisms, her cries unheard in a society that feared her very existence. These personal struggles paint a stark picture of an era where disability branded you as an outcast, a burden, or a sinner. Superstition fueled the fire. Some believed suffering earned heavenly favor, a twisted solace that rarely translated to kindness. Instead, the disabled were mocked, isolated, or turned into spectacles of humiliation. Historians still debate whether modern views overstate this cruelty, or if hidden compassion existed beneath the surface. But the evidence leans heavily toward a grim reality. The streets, the churches, the very laws of the time conspired to strip away dignity, leaving only the raw will to persist. Reflecting on the daily survival gauntlet, it's clear that resilience was not just a trait, but a necessity. John's trembling hands, Pierre's aching stump, Margaret's shattered mind. They fought not just for breath, but to be seen as human. Their stories, though buried in history's margins, echo with a defiance that outlasts the cruelty they faced. Yet, their world was one of endless barriers, where a single misstep could end everything. This harsh truth of their lives sets the stage for a deeper understanding of how far we've come and how much further we must go. Their silent battles pave the way to consider what lessons we can draw from such a merciless past, and how we build a future they could only dream of. Centuries ago, a disabled person in the Middle Ages faced a world that offered no mercy, where a single day could be a death sentence due to neglect and scorn. Contrast that with today, and the transformation is staggering. Modern hospitals rebuild broken bodies with advanced surgery and medication, a far cry from the crude, deadly remedies of the 1300s. A blind individual now reads in Braille or navigates cities with GPS apps, while prosthetics enable a limbless person to walk, work, or even compete in sports. Mental health support through therapy and medication replaces the chains and exorcisms once inflicted on the mad. Legal protections further redefine life for the disabled. Unlike medieval exclusion, where a blind woman could be cast out with nothing, today's laws safeguard inheritance and employment rights. Accessibility ramps, sign language, Braille opens doors that were once slammed shut, allowing a deaf student to thrive in a classroom rather than be shunned as dumb. Yet shadows of the past persist. Stares at a wheelchair user or whispers about a crazy neighbor echo the medieval stigma that branded disability as a curse. Progress is real, but not complete. Even innovations mirror history with a modern twist. Medieval crutches, often just broken branches, find a parallel in today's high-tech prosthetics, blending ancient necessity with cutting-edge design. And while charity in the Middle Ages was fleeting, often more about the donor's salvation than genuine care, its legacy as a precursor to modern welfare systems reminds us how far we've come. Still, historians debate whether today's attitudes fully escape those old prejudices, or if subtle biases linger in society's corners. The gap between then and now is a testament to human advancement built on the unseen struggles of those like John Pierre and Margaret. Their endurance in a brutal era pushes us to value and protect the rights we've gained, but it also raises a quiet challenge. How do we ensure this progress endures? And how do we erase the last traces of medieval scorn from our world? As we ponder this, let's carry their resilience forward, ready to build on these lessons in the steps ahead. Reflecting on the stark contrasts between medieval hardships and today's advancements, a deeper truth emerges. The resilience of John the blind tailor, Pierre the limbless veteran, and Margaret the mad weaver isn't just a relic of the past. It's a call to examine our present. Their 24-hour battles in a merciless world where disability meant exclusion and scorn highlight a haunting reality. Progress isn't permanent unless we guard it. Accessibility laws, a triumph of the 20th century, have reshaped lives, granting rights and dignity once unimaginable. Yet, even now, full inclusion remains a distant goal, as historians and advocates debate how much further society must stretch to truly embrace everyone. Picture John's trembling hands reaching for scraps in a muddy London alley. Imagine Pierre's fevered nights under a frost-bitten oak, his warrior spirit broken by neglect. Hear Margaret's anguished cries, chained by fear rather than care. Their endurance through unimaginable cruelty whispers a challenge to us. How do we ensure their struggles weren't in vain? It starts with recognizing that modern tools, from braille to prosthetics, are only as powerful as the compassion behind them. A quirky parallel lingers. Medieval lepers wore bells to signal their presence, much like today's accessibility alerts guide the way. But alerts and laws alone don't erase lingering stares or whispered judgments. Their forgotten stories buried in history's margins demand to be heard. Each day they survived was a silent act of defiance against a society that branded them as less. Standing in our brighter era, where medicine heals and voices rise, their ghosts remind us that kindness isn't guaranteed. Progress can slip if we grow complacent. So pause and consider, how can we build a world they could only dream of? Maybe it's in the small, deliberate choices, seeing the person beyond the challenge, advocating for unseen needs, or simply listening. If their lives have stirred something in you, let's keep this conversation alive. Share your thoughts below what struck you most about John Pierre or Margaret's fight to exist, their pain, their strength, or the cruelty they faced. Drop a like if you feel their stories deserve to echo further, helping others uncover these hidden corners of history. Subscribe if you're drawn to explore more tales of humanity's past with me. As the night settles in, let their quiet courage linger in your mind. Take a slow, steady breath, easing the weight of their world from your shoulders. Rest knowing we're crafting a tomorrow kinder than theirs ever was. Their time was one of flickering candlelight in damp shacks of hunger, gnawing through endless winters of chains binding both body and soul. Yet, in our time, we hold the power to weave a different story. Let's carry their resilience as a guiding flame, a reminder to never let compassion fade. Until we meet again for another journey through history's shadows, sleep gently, friends, beneath a sky far softer than the one they knew. Good night.